Welcome. I'm Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, In the Beginning, the Book of Genesis. Today we'll be talking about lesson 19 of our study, which covers the book of Genesis, chapters 32 and 33. In this lesson, we see the second of Jacob's two major recounted encounters with God. As he was leaving home, he had the first one at Bethel. And as a part of that, he reached a conclusion with God that if he were able to leave and also to return back home safely and prosperously, that he would serve God. It's been a lot of years, 20 years since then, and now at God's direction he is returning home, which means kind of in the background of this whole thing there is that idea of now it's time for him to make good on that, though he has clearly also been serving God in his time away. There is still that lingering idea of what he said he would do. When he left, he had no relationship with God that we had really seen. And God comes to him in a dream, and he realizes, oh yeah, okay, this is a thing. This encounter is going to be a lot more direct, or is a lot more direct than just a dream, as we see, and is profound and life-changing. The way the other one was as well. It's interesting how in our relationships with God and how as these things develop, they build on one another, right? Like this one is what happens and how it comes into play is possible because of the other one. And that happens in our lives as well. The spiritual life is cumulative, and as we develop and grow, the new things that happen are a result of or are related to the things that we've already been through as we've grown, as so many other things in life are as well. This is one of my personal favorite passages in the Bible because it helped me work through some things at a difficult time in my life, so it's especially fun for me to be able to talk about. The other key backdrop here is this is all in the context of Jacob is about to meet Esau again. And if you remember, when they parted ways, Jacob was leaving town because Esau was looking to kill him. It's been 20 years, but there is far from any kind of guarantee that that's not still what's on Esau's mind. And in fact, Jacob's view is that is going to be what's on Esau's mind. And so this kind of crisis of conscience or faith comes as Jacob is on the verge of meeting his brother again. And with that in the backdrop, knowing that God had told him to return home and had promised him fulfillment of the things that had been promised to Abraham, there is conflict around, I don't really want to do this, and is this safe on the one hand, and God is telling me to do this on the other hand. And he is doing it, but there's conflict. Often in the Bible, when we think of struggling over a moral decision, we think of it like Jesus going off into the desert and being tempted by Satan, right? And Satan being the adversary. And if I'm having a crisis of conscience, I'm on God's side and I'm wrestling against the devil. This is not that, which is what makes this so interesting. This is rather being on the side against or having a hard time coming into line with God. This is more like Jesus at Gethsemane, uh, struggling with what he knows he has to do, and still having a hard time as a human being consenting to the things that he knows are coming, even when he is willing. This is that kind of struggle, which is what makes it so interesting. Jacob, like Jesus, is doing the things that he was told. He's not backing out. He's not going a different direction. He's doing what has been asked of him, but it is still creating for him a struggle. And that's what manifests here in the form of Jacob wrestling with this man, whom he later identifies as God. So that is what we're getting into today, is Jacob returning home, preparing to meet his brother again, and the moral or struggle of morals or conscience that goes along with that. And we'll unpack that more as we get to the particular text as well. But this is an interesting one, and very relevant for anyone who's ever experienced struggling to do God's will, even as we do it, which probably everyone who is trying to do God's will has. Two relevant things here. The first, as Jacob is going home, he meets angels of God and sees God's army. This seems like it wouldn't be that relevant, but again, it sets up a couple of things. One, remember when he was leaving at Bethel, he saw angels ascending and descending in the place he was, and that was this religious experience. So now on the way back, this time angels meet him, right? Last time he was kind of off to the side and he was observing, and now he is a part of this, which kind of highlights his growth and how he is closer to God than he was before. It also, as God's army, when he's anticipating conflict, would serve to bolster his resolve or his confidence. So while it seems like a little bit of a non sequitur, it's very relevant in terms of setting the stage and also helping highlight, Jacob's mindset and how he can see God as being behind him in this thing he's doing. The second thing that happens is Jacob sends his brother a message. He does not wait for his brother to be surprised that he's around, which is very prudent of him. He knows there's this thing. He's not going to leave it hanging over his head forever. He needs to get it resolved as he's coming home. So he sends to let his brother know that he's coming home. I'm not sure his point in saying that he has a lot of stuff. It clearly indicates that he has prospered in his time away, but that, of course, could be seen as a result of the blessing that he swiped from Esau. That could be just kind of rubbing it in. He doesn't mention that he means to share yet at this point. We see that a little later. But he seems to see that as a thing to find favor in the sight of Esau, So maybe there is an implication that if Jacob is now wealthy, that is a good thing for Esau, and it's just not said explicitly. That does seem to be his intention, even if it's not a thing that we necessarily readily gather. So Jacob, with a closer relationship with God and God showing him his support, is coming home and has reached out to his brother to let him know that's happening. On getting the message, Esau decides to come meet Jacob and to bring 400 men with him. What does this look like? First, Esau himself has been prosperous. A poor person is not going to be able to get 400 men to come with them on an expedition like this. So it tells us something about Esau's prosperity as well. And it also scares Jacob, which is fair. If you're coming to say hi, you don't need to bring what at that time in that area was a very large force with you. This sure looks like Esau intends violence and has Jacob alarmed. And what does Jacob do? He decides, if he's coming to wipe us out, he doesn't know how much I have or how many of us there are. So let us split everything in two. So if they come in and they wipe something out, they only wipe out half. And we have something left. He is planning for the worst. And it seems to be his thought that this is ill intent, that Esau learns he's coming back after all these years and decides, I'm going to come meet you with an army. Having divided his company, Jacob's next course of action is to pray. He calls on God, and this is a very humble prayer. This is maybe not how we may have viewed the Jacob of his youth. It begins with, I acknowledge that I'm returning and that I am prosperous, and it's all because of you, God, and I don't deserve any of that. I know that you have done all of that for me already. But while you're doing things for me, that would be kind of fruitless if you now let Esau just come in and wipe me out. And remember what you promised Abraham and Isaac and me about our descendants. And, maybe that would be hard to do if my brother comes in and kills us all. So could you please help with that? Because I'm afraid that my brother is going to harm me. Note that he doesn't in any place say that he doesn't deserve being harmed by his brother or that that's unjust or unreasonable. I'm not necessarily sure that he would, but it's not unreasonable to speculate that he realizes now, after his time with Laban, that he really did not do right by his brother, and that maybe there is reason that his brother might not be thrilled with him, even if murder seems a little extreme also, and Esau's not, entirely right in this whole thing either, because he definitely was trying to kill Jacob before Jacob left. Like, neither one was great in that situation. But Jacob has grown, it looks like, and is no longer in a position where he doesn't seem to be trying to pretend like what he did was fine. He's not trying to undo it, not that it can be, but he's not trying to justify or gloss over that he did well by his brother. So Jacob implores God to see him through this reunion. The next thing that Jacob does is he thinks of a way to try to appease what he perceives as Esau's anger, which is, I will give him a bunch of stuff that might lessen the blow a little bit. And I'm going to do it in a particular way where as he's coming toward me, he keeps running into servants who are giving him more and more stuff. So rather than have it happen all at once, it's going to be kind of a continual flood of stuff coming his way. And hopefully that will appease him, especially that effect of it continuing to happen over and over again. This seems clever and in line with the Jacob that we are used to. No guarantee that it will work, but it certainly doesn't hurt to try. Again, he has no idea. He hasn't talked to Esau yet. All he knows is Esau wanted to kill him and is now coming to meet him with a sizable force. And so, on the assumption that he's coming to wipe him out, giving him a portion of his stuff, even a pretty significant one, is better than the alternative. So he makes that effort. He's making all of the preparations he reasonably can here and doing everything that he can think of and control. The thing he's not doing is turning back. God told him to go home. He's going home. This barrier, this obstacle is in his way. He is scared of it, and he is continuing to return, even though he is very afraid of what he thinks is about to happen and what reasonably seems like it's about to happen. This is a very significant predicament that I don't think gets maybe enough talked about in this whole context. This has shades of what both of his forebears did. This is Abraham traveling into an unknown land on God's direction without giving it a second thought. God said go, and Abram went. And this is Abraham willing to sacrifice his only son, although in this case it's Jacob's life and all of his family, because of what God is asking him to do. Jacob himself won't be the one doing the sacrificing, but he believes that there is a very good chance that on God's direction, he is leading himself, his family, and everyone following him into mortal danger. But God has told him to go, and he is going. This puts Jacob in... This shows how much he's grown, right? And shows why he has his place as a patriarch. It's the acts of faith of his forebears are not things that are foreign to him or that he's unwilling to do. When he left, I think he would have been very unwilling to do this, but now he is willingly returning. And this now has to be about more than just he was tired of Laban trying to rob him, right? If it was just about stuff, there are other places he could go and have stuff. This is about his relationship with God and his trust of God. it's a very significant moment in his life that, faced with this situation, he's saying, nope, we're going. Uh, we're going to prudently prepare as much as we can for what might happen, but we're going and we're doing this. It doesn't seem as dramatic as Abraham being willing to sacrifice Isaac, because that got so far and it was Abraham doing it with his own hand. But it is nonetheless kind of a similar sort of situation. So that's where Jacob's at, both kind of physically and in terms of what he's doing to get ready for it, and kind of spiritually as well. This is a big thing that's happening that gets kind of drowned out, but a lot of times, by the thing that happens next. But I think it's important to have the right context for Jacob going into the thing that happens next, to understand that. So this is a thumbs up for what Jacob's doing right now. This is a huge thing. I'm not sure many of us would be willing to do this. In the intro, I compared kind of his struggle that he's undergoing to Gethsemane. I don't think that's unfair, right? He really believes he's going into mortal danger for himself and everyone around him. And he says, well, God, if that's what you want me to do, I guess that's what I'm doing. So, fascinating thing happening. Lastly, by way of preparation, Jacob takes his family, crosses to where he needs to be, but then also moves them to the other side of a stream, so that there is distance between Jacob and his family and everyone else. He's putting himself in the line of fire here, so to speak. Again, he doesn't want, if Esau just wants to kill him, he wants to make sure Esau doesn't have to go through anyone else, especially his family, in order to do so. And that would be his final preparation. They're coming close to meeting. This is the night before, and he seems to know that with what he's doing. Then, as Jacob is all alone at night, he meets and begins to wrestle with the man. It's unclear how they start wrestling or who the man is, which is fascinating and so important. But at any rate, he finds himself wrestling with a man. They seem to be evenly matched. The man sees that he is not prevailing against Jacob. It's coming on daybreak. And finally, the man touches the hollow of Jacob's thigh and puts the joint out of place with a touch. That also suggests that although they have seemed to be evenly matched for what seems like a long time, they very possibly never were. If this man that he's wrestling with can do that so easily, he could get away at any time. But he's not, and in the wrestling, they seem evenly matched. This is odd. This is very odd. For now, that's all we know. We'll come back and look at that again in the next bit after we see how this situation unfolds. Finally, the man asks Jacob to let him go, Jacob says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And at that point, the man asks, what is your name? Jacob. And then he says, not anymore. Now your name is Israel. His name changes from being something that has to do with deceit to something that has to do with wrestling or contending with God, is what Israel means. Remember, in the Bible, names mean more than names. So this changing of his name represents likewise a change of his identity. And why is that being done? Because you have striven, or in some translations, contended with God and with men and have prevailed. Jacob is getting the win here, not because he overcame this man, but because they were tied, interestingly again, right? Like, it's a stalemate the whole time. And that is what is being treated as a win. And then Jacob says, okay, so what's your name? And the man responds, why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him. In Jacob's takeaway, he names the place Peniel, saying he's seen God face to face. Jacob is the one now saying, this was God. And the sun rises and Jacob is limping. And there's a little bit about the Israelites not eating sinew of the hip because of that, which seems like it's explaining something kind of a little backwardsly, but there it is. So what is going on in this exchange with Jacob and this man? I said a little in the intro. There's a thing where I think we're more likely to view spiritual struggle as struggle between us and the devil, right? Like that we can believe, right? Like that's what we do as Christians. We fight against evil and the devil, but that is not the fight that is happening here. Jacob believes that he has seen and contended with God. And the name Israel, in fact, is about wrestling with God. So we know that God was involved in this struggle and not the devil. But there are more layers to it than that, that are both interesting and important. Who really is Jacob wrestling with? And this is everything, I think, for when we think about our own struggles with God and in the spiritual life. It's important that this man is unidentified, that Jacob just finds himself there in a fight with him, and that he and Jacob are evenly matched. I think that it is fair to see this as Jacob wrestling with himself. God is certainly involved, but in my experience, when we contend with God, when we're trying to do God's will, the person we're fighting is not God. It's ourselves. I think this is Jacob wrestling with Jacob on behalf of God, right? Like, Jacob seems to be fighting here on the cusp of meeting his brother to go through with and continue to do what God has asked him to do. He's doing it, but he doesn't want to. And it is a struggle for him. And here he is the night before it's happening, I really like the parallel between this and the Garden of Gethsemane, because we don't see much of what's in Jesus' head during all of that. We just hear him ask if there's a way for it not to happen, to have that not happen, and we see that he's sweating blood, which gives us some external indicator of the internal struggle, but we don't actually see a lot of that internal struggle. Here we see that struggle manifest in Jacob wrestling with this man. And again, in my experience, that's how that works. For me, this passage was especially relevant at a time in my life where I was still considering a religious vocation, to the priesthood especially, and I was very torn about that. I felt like it was a thing that I should do, but I also didn't want to, and I was having a very hard time coming to terms with not wanting to do this thing that I felt all this pressure on me to do, and it made it very hard to discern or to see the will of God. It's not as what God wanted was not, I think, as clear to me in that situation as it is to Jacob here. But I felt very much like I was wrestling with, contending with God's will. But the thing that I was really fighting with, I think, looking back now, was myself and this wrong view I had of who I was and who God wanted me to be and who I had to be and what that looked like. And so it was, as this is for Jacob, an identity crisis for me as well. And I came out on the other side of it with a much clearer view of myself and my identity and peace with the decision that I made not to move in that direction. And I had a much less fragmented and more cohesive identity and relationship with God as a result of getting through that. Jacob here also goes into this fight with one identity and comes out with another. He wrestles himself, and when he's done, he is different for having done so. And he recognizes in that he has seen God, but he never actually says that God is the one he wrestled. Although it's certainly valid to see it that way as well. That's kind of, he's definitely striven with God, and the renaming suggests some amount of wrestling with God as well. But even the man's comment is, you have contended with divine and human beings and have prevailed, suggesting that there was some amount of human struggle coupled with the divine struggle that he was experiencing, which is kind of, you line up, I want to do this, God wants me to do this, there's this other human side of me that doesn't want to do this, and there's a big fight over it taking place inside of you as a person, and out comes, I'm going to do what God wants, that other side of me loses, and I am a stronger and more unified person now for having worked through that struggle and committed myself to following God. I may be overreading personal experience into this and maybe misinterpreting it as a result, but I think that's what's going on, and I think the detail and lack thereof of the text supports that in a fascinating way. I also think that is a useful concept for us to keep in mind, that when we're struggling to do God's will, often the one we struggle with isn't God, but ourselves, right? It's the part of me that isn't okay with that wants to hold on to who I've been, what I've been doing, what's comfortable, this old identity. I want to keep being what I know, instead of embracing God, taking a step into the unknown and becoming something different. The Christian life very much requires us to take that step into being willing to become something different than we are by nature. It's essential to the Christian life. We know that by nature we are flawed and fallen. It is the objective of Christianity to change who we are at birth and to become something greater. To do that, we have to be willing to change. And that change requires, I think, a certain amount of battle with and violence toward who we are to become who we're meant to be. I think this is not just a thing that Jacob experiences. I think this is again, I could be wrong. I think this is a fundamental human experience in taking up and progressing in the spiritual life toward the kind of relationship with God that he wants us to have. This idea of I'm going to put God and what he wants ahead of me and what I want. In my personal case, it was worse because I got it backwards. And I got stuck on the fact that what I thought God wanted was really a human thing that was weighing me down. And it made it really hard it took a long time to get my head straight on that and to get clear on all of that. It's not always straightforward, which is why we have to stay in conversation with and relationship with God. And it can be very destructive to form in our minds an idea of, I am so sure that this is what God has in mind for me and this is what I should be doing. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel comfortable. It's not at all but surely that must be what God wants, right? Like, sometimes God can surprise us, and it's very important not just to set and fix a view or an identity of who we are or who we need to be, but to be open to letting God come in and to surprise us, as we'll see he does here with Jacob as well. And what we think is the deal might not be the deal, and what we're so concerned about might not be a big deal, but we can build things up in our minds as this is a huge deal and a big conflict, and the only thing that's a conflict and the only thing that's in the way is me. And in order for things to play out and to progress as God wants, I have to get past me. And that's what Jacob models here. And I think that is the thing we all have to learn how to do. I also think it's the thing that we can get better at. It can be, depending on where you're at in your life, it can be a big dramatic struggle, or it can be something you kind of get used to and just have to spend a little bit of time checking yourself on. But for me, at least, the first time especially was kind of a doozy. And for that reason, this resonates a lot. It did back right when I was sorting it all out finally, after more than 5 years with it. Maybe going on 10 actually. And finally it was sorting out. And that's when I found myself studying and reading this passage. And actually it was in studying this at that point that all of a sudden something clicked and said, oh, I'm looking at this wrong. I don't have to be stuck in this way of thinking. And now everything makes so much sense. So, special place in my heart for this passage. It came to me and helped me through something that I had been stuck on for a long time, and was not succeeding in navigating my way clear of. Anyway, Jacob wrestles with a man and has an encounter with God. Comes out with a limp and a new name and peace with the direction he is pursuing, and some vague and unspecified blessing otherwise. Then that morning, it seems like not long after this is resolved, Jacob looks up, sees Esau and his 400 men, divides the children, puts all of the women and children behind him, with Rachel and Joseph farthest back, and then goes in front of everyone to Esau and shows Esau a tremendous amount of deference, bowing to the ground 7 times before him as he comes near. Right up until now, we have been in Jacob's head and Jacob's perspective about what this is and what's going to happen. And we have not seen Esau's perspective, which I think is important for building up the drama around Jacob's wrestling and renaming. We would not have had the same tension if we knew Esau's perspective going into this, that he seems to just be happy to see his brother again. And it matters so much to that previous event, Jacob's psychology going into all of this. But here, again, we see God can surprise us. What Jacob was so sure was the deal and what was going to happen isn't at all. Although Esau's behavior still seems a little weird, he did bring 400 men. But, Esau could be equally weary of Jacob, for all we know. Jacob didn't exactly treat Esau so great before either. So maybe he felt the need to make a point. Maybe he didn't even mind scaring Jacob a little bit, but maybe he also felt the need to protect himself a little bit as well. We don't know his motives. It's interesting. But what we do know is that when they meet, rather than trying to kill Jacob, he runs to him, embraces him, and kisses him, and they weep, and greets him as a long-lost brother, rather than as an adversary. What a surprise turn of events. They seem closer in this moment than we ever saw them when they were growing up. It seems like maybe Esau has done some maturing as well. Jacob introduces his family to Esau, and then they argue about who is going to keep the gifts that Jacob gave to Esau. And Esau says, no, seriously, God's taking care of me too. I'm fine. I don't need any of that. But Jacob insists, and ultimately Esau takes it. Other things we're not clear about. How did Esau become prosperous? Is it the same way as Jacob? Did maybe when Jacob was gone and took nothing with him, did maybe Dad, who always favored Esau, make sure to take good care of him and give him a lot of things and a nice head start that Jacob didn't get? We saw in the case of Abraham's children that even the unfavored one inherited some of the promise and the blessing of God. it's possible that Esau has likewise not been left unfavored by God, even if Jacob has that main blessing. It's possible that Isaac took very good care of Esau in Jacob's absence. It's possible all of that is true, or none of it. We don't know, but we know that Esau's situation seems to be good, and with it being good, he doesn't have any hard feelings, because of course, what he was worried Jacob was stealing from him was prosperity. And if he has managed to be prosperous, then what has Jacob really taken from him? We know he didn't care much about his birthright, although he did seem to care about the blessing. It seems like for him the blessing might have been more about what it brings and less about the relationship with God, which is all the more reason why God may have intervened to have it find its way to Jacob, though he didn't seem any more interested in the God part of the blessing than Esau was back then. Now now at least he gets it. Quite the surprise meeting. Interesting contrast between the two brothers. It would be fascinating to get Esau's point of view of getting the message from Jacob, gathering the 400 men and coming to meet him, and to see what he's thinking. We only know what Jacob was thinking. But at any rate, this is a reunion of long-lost brothers, and ultimately Esau accepts Jacob's gift. Here and in the next bit, we get to something else interesting. Esau wants to travel together with Jacob and all of Jacob's company and his 400 men. And Jacob makes an excuse. Oh, look at these frail children. They can't keep up with you. And, the herd's like, they're going to die if we try to move too fast. You go on ahead, my lord, brother, just go on ahead and we will meet you where you live. We'll be there, as soon as we can travel, but you just go on ahead. There is still doubt about Esau's intent. We don't know if that's fair or not. I suppose it's fair. We don't know if it's justified or not. Because again, we don't know what is in Esau's head. But Esau could have thought, I need to make sure I get everything together here before I do anything. So I'll play nice, and then when they're off guard, then we'll go ahead and we'll take everything. He does still have these 400 men, and that does raise questions about his intent. But at any rate, he wants to travel with Jacob and his company, and Jacob is suggesting that won't work for logistical reasons. Finally, Esau says, well, okay, I'll go on ahead, but why don't I leave a bunch of my 400 men here to keep you safe? And Jacob again says, oh, no need. I will meet you in Seir as soon as I can get there. So ultimately, Esau goes on ahead with all of his men, and Jacob does not go to Seir. Jacob goes to Sukkoth, and buys some land in or around Shechem, and erects an altar. Jacob has come home, but he does not go to live where his brother is. We don't know if that would have been fine or not. We know it's not what Jacob wanted to do, and we know Esau's behavior was a little sketchy, but it could have all been easily explained by his uncertainty about Jacob. Or I guess now we should call him Israel. It is an interesting meeting. It doesn't ever come up that Esau keeps those men or gathers more or in any way comes after his brother. So if he really wanted to, he missed his chance, but it doesn't seem like he really wanted to. It seems like he was on the up and up, but that might still not mean that Jacob wants to live with him. It might be as simple as that, as he didn't distrust him, but he didn't want to live with him and didn't want to tell him that. It was an awkward situation to discuss differences there when there was a power imbalance with Esau having the army. So Jacob chose to dodge that conversation for whatever reason. But at any rate, Jacob is now safely and in one piece back home. He is now Israel instead of Jacob. He has, on his return, taken up a new identity and one to do with service of God, fulfilling the promise he made to God when he left at Bethel. And so now that cycle and that circle completes. Jacob and his currently 11 sons are together and are ready to grow, develop, and prosper. They're also pretty wealthy. And we've seen that blessing already greatly at play in his life. This has been an overview of Lesson 19 of the Turning to God's Word Bible Study. In the beginning, the book of Genesis. For more information, consult our written study and visit us online at turningtogodsword.com.